All right, so I wasn't going to do this, but why don't we tackle a object-oriented forms part 3 in this video. So let's take a look at where we left off. We have our errors class, where we can determine do we have errors, get the error, record the errors, clear the errors. We then have our form class that we worked on, where we can reset the form, we can submit it with AJAX, we can, once again, delegate to clear the errors and reset the form, all of that stuff. So this is what your regular view instance or component might look like. You new up a form class, you pass through your values. But now, in this case, yes, we submit the form, but in real life, you may need to do other things. Now, it might be nice if we could just say, then receive the data and alert handling it. Okay, so yeah, you can imagine once you submit the form, you still need to respond. You have to update a value on your view instance. You need to alert. You need to display a flash message. Maybe you need to relocate somewhere. So we need to offer this functionality. But the problem is, right now, that doesn't work. Let's see what happens. When we submit the form, we catch then, so on a successful request, we call on success, we alert, and then we clear. So right now, we have no ability to hook into this process within our view instance. So if we want to call .then, well, that's using promises, right? And if you're not familiar with promises, we've of course covered them at Laracasts in the ECMAScript 6 or ECMAScript 2015 series. Maybe give that a watch. But in general, think of a promise as an object we can use for any kind of asynchronous request. I like to think of a promise almost like shaking a person's hand and saying, I don't have the information you need right now, but I promise you that when I do, I will let you know. And I will let you know via this then method. And if anything goes wrong and we couldn't get this data for you or we couldn't get this information, then once again, I promise to let you know via the catch method. That's sort of how I like to think about it. So if we want to use .then, it sounds like we need to return our own promise, like this. Return a new promise, and it's going to accept two different arguments here for resolve and reject. So essentially, if everything goes according to plan, we will call resolve, and if anything fails, we will call reject. This is how we manually set up a promise. So in this case, the JavaScript library we're using here, this call right here does return a promise, and that's what allows you to call .then and .catch. But now we want to do it in our view instance, so we're going to wrap the whole thing within another promise so that, once again, down here, you could call .then or .catch. Okay, so let's do this. Let's handle this, but then we're going to change it up. If we have a successful request, I'm just going to accept the response down here, and then we'll delegate to the onSuccess method, and we're going to give it the response.data. So now this receives the data, and we can just assume that. Okay, next, if everything went according to plan, we're going to handle the successful request, and then we're going to call resolve. And again, this is sort of like we shook their hand earlier, and now we're calling back to them and saying, hey, I finally got that information. What do you want to do with it? So I had the information, and here is the data associated with it. So now when I call resolve, within my view instance, this can be triggered, and again, it will receive the data. Cool. So now if we come back, that looks good, but let's catch some errors here. Once again, by delegating to onFail, and we'll give it the error.response.data. I'm just going to send it right through. So if we come back, before we were fetching it here, let's just call it errors, like so. Okay, so we can get rid of that. And now finally, if something went wrong, we have to notify them as well. And I'll just send this through again. And yeah, I think that should do it. So yeah, promises can be a little scary, I think, but once you understand the basic flow, it makes good sense. So when we call form.submit, we're going to do a post request to some endpoint. We will return a new promise. And so this is going to be triggered immediately. We will submit the AJAX request. And if everything went well and we got a 200 response from the server, we will call on success, where we temporarily alert a message, and then we reset the form. Now in this case, maybe we can take this out, and maybe that should belong in the reset method, like so. If we reset the form, it's implied that the errors should also be cleared out. So yeah, I think this can contain that responsibility. and that cleans this up just a little bit. Anyways, then we will resolve and we will call back to the user if they need to handle this successful request on their own. Otherwise, if we catch an error, then we call onFail, where we record the errors. And then finally, we call reject, which allows you to also down here say catch an error. And then once again, why don't we just console.log the error? Okay, so why don't we do this? Console.log data, and we're going to take a look at this and see if we did everything correctly. Okay, so here's our little project form. I'm going to open up Chrome DevTools, and let's submit it with no data. It will hit the server, and if we come back, here's our object. It is view enhanced for reactivity, but we can see the name here, and we can see the description. So that's everything we would want. Let's clear that out, though, and submit some new project and a description. And if we create that, project created, and now we've delegated back to our view instance where we console.log the response. And in this case, it just contains the message. So yeah, I mean, that's Promises 101, and that'll take you a long way. Now, finally, to finish up, why don't we see if there's any other refactoring we can do? We'll go to the top. So errors is actually very, very clean. I think I'm going to keep it like that. If we come down to form, we did have this one section where we have to fetch all of the data for the request. But right now, we have some other things assigned to the instance, like errors and original data, and those should not be part of the request. So we did that in the previous episode by cloning the object and then just deleting the things we don't want. But you know what? It was rightly pointed out in the comments that we still have access to the original data. So that means we could do something like this instead if we want. We could just say, for let property in this dot original data, then let's create a data object here. Then we'll say data property equals this property. Does that make sense? That can be a little confusing. So we have a data object, and this will ultimately be what we return. So now we're filtering through the original data. And you'll remember right here, the original data is passed right here. So we're passing name and description. So now let me go back to where we were. Okay, we are filtering through name and description. And for each one, we're basically saying data.name equals this.name. And then data.description equals this.description. So yeah, I think that's kind of a cleaner way, and that was a good suggestion. So we will stick with that. Next, what else? We reset the form, and then we clear the errors. I think that's fine. We can get rid of that. And yeah, of course, like I said, I think that's somewhat clunky. What I would do in my own projects, like we talked about in the last episode, is have something like this. Post to a URL, and then I can return a call to this submit where I wrap that up. You want to make that as simple as possible. So if you have a patch request or a delete request, once again, return this.submit, delete, and then give it the URL. Now, you could say down here in your view instance, you could say this.form, we're going to submit a delete request to projects. And that's pretty clean. Okay, that'll do it for this episode.